Hi class, welcome to Module 6. This particular module addresses the family as an institution, and we start seeing what the family is like. What's the typical family look like? Well, it doesn't look like sometimes the way we think it looks like. Families have changed dramatically over time, and yet in many ways they've stayed the same. We just fail to notice that things uh, that our perception may be that there's mom, dad, and two kids or three kids, that nuclear family, and mom stays home. Those things never were. They were a very small period of time. We talk about families a great deal. The university has two sections of American Family Systems offered every spring. One of my focus areas coming out of family studies is families as we start to explore that. So big issues that I could go into that aren't where we're going. What's important to look at in this particular study of families is the theories that come into place. It's a vital social institution. Families define our social status. If we're born into the middle class, we are most likely to stay in the middle class from those social influences. We can see the same effect from upper class or poverty coming into place. We have this image of families as mom and dad, but we know that by law, there is this tie together of families. Either you are biologically related or you are related by law. And yet today, families look very different. Law may not even be involved, and we form a family. Conflict theory looks at families as an unequal system where conflict exists. In fact, Marx and Engels, when they are writing, said it's the worst place for a woman to be because she was property of her husband during the time that they were. Everything she did and everything she owned belonged to him in the system, and that she was under full control. So she was the proletariat and he was the bourgeoisie as we look at that process. In conflict theory, we can see that the family system has a lot of things that go on, and those coming into effect in the power structure, children, and power is a big issue when we look at the problems of social families. Symbolic interaction looks at our perception of family is our first source. We learn how to be socialized. We learn the values of symbols. We learn what it means to be part of a family. Our membership are defined within that. And the biggest push and understanding of what family is comes from that individualized look at things. So what are the social problems? That's where we'll go next. This is the last module before your midterm. So keep that in mind as you're going forward. And remember, your midterm is multiple choice and short answer. You will have three short essays, I'm sorry, four essay questions that you will be addressing, and those are worth equal to the multiple choice. So allow enough time to complete your essays. Let's pop over to the PowerPoints and look at a few things. So this is what we think of families looking like. A false illusion sometimes. So what is the typical family? A man and woman and their children, extended families, grandparents, aunts, uncles, single parents with children, same-sex couple. Does your own background influence your definition of family? Remember, you're using the sociological imagination here, where you step outside of yourself and move to explore this particular area. Family defined sociologically. Well, family is a construct. Been through race, been through gender, been social orientation, a social construct that comes into place that has a meaning and relationships that both emotional and economic. It is a social unit based on kinship relationships, but not only relationships by blood, but those created by choice. So people that you're very close to, you treat them as family, or they are in that process. And there is a tie together. Now, families are household units. That's how the government defines them. And we see that significant things come into place. So there's this myth of families, this image of nuclear families, of mother, father, biological or adopted children all living together. But family composition had greatly changed. Now, remember, as we explore families, even in the past, there were many, many forms of family. Not everyone could marry because there wasn't someone to marry them, or they may have chosen to cohabitate. We also know when we worry about teen pregnancy, that more people in the 1800s were pregnant when they got married than today, or at those younger ages, because less birth control, different situations. Where did you live? What was going on? So continue to look at everything historically as you start to explore that. But several changes in family compositions have occurred, and we see the percentage of families composed of married couples with children have declined. Now, that's easy to walk into, isn't it? Because we've just covered aging, and we know that there are significant numbers of families that are husband and wife couples that are still existing and aging that no longer have children. So we see the decline of children. We also see the increase of family groups with category of other families. And we can see that the difference comes into place, that those households with no spouse present, where grandparents are raising grandchildren, where relatives step into place. They may include the addition of other relatives into that process. We see cohabitation of friends to help support and create a family bond. So big differences. In 2007, the U.S. Census data revealed that for the first time, American women were living without a husband, without a husband than with one. And so we see this increase of single parent families, especially for women. And part of that is later marriage of women, women who decide not to marry and still want a family. Women are more likely to delay remarriage, so they will stay in the single parent role, and they're more likely to be widowed. Pretty significant as we start to explore that. So, socially constructed, back to that idea. We tend to believe that families of the past were better and happier than today, and we will see that that's not necessarily true in any way, that there were significant issues in the past. We believe that families should be a safe haven, protecting their members, and we know that that is not the case. Actually, you're more likely to be harmed, even murdered by a family member than a stranger. So there are big processes that come into it. There is a persistent belief that non-traditional families erode the integrity of the family system. I think of this as I was sitting in festival chorus and talking with someone about my American Family Systems class, and this other member popped up and said, the whole problem with the world is the fact that families are falling apart, that we're not holding together in the traditional family with husband and wife and child. It took everything to be a courteous community member of Mansfield University and not come after a community member with a lecture of check your statistics before you go forward. You see, that's what sociology is often about, isn't it? Looking at what we think should be and looking at what really is. So a quick review here of the functionalist conflict theory and interactionist theories. When we start to look at that, we can see how feminist theory really pops up in family. And I didn't mention that as we were going over the beginning information. But feminist perspective, the family is a patriarchal system. You can see the dominance in place. You can see its role within conflict. You can see that problems emerge from the conflict inherent to family structure, where the interactionists focus on the meaning of family and the influence of families. And we think about the looking glass self here, where Cooley is talking about how we determine who we are. You know, that's really hard with me online, but in a classroom, if I'm looking out there at the class and you're busy on your devices and not paying attention to me, the view of myself is I'm boring. You have no interest in sociology. We may not have anything to do with that, but we perceive those notions. Family is that first looking glass that comes at you to define who you are, to determine how you perceive yourself. You can see the gender roles coming into place that are taught within that family structure, the power of whether you're a college-bound student and you belong in college. How does it come in place? Where's your support for family? So what are the social problems? Divorce. Divorce was relatively rare. Now remember that divorce was very different in the past. In the 1800s, if you wanted a divorce, you could apply to go for divorce, and men had the power. Women, if they wanted a divorce, had to prove that the man was no longer supporting or they deserted. So infidelity was not a reason for divorce. A man could file for divorce. He automatically gained the children. And he could state that she had not kept a clean house, she was unfit, she was crazy. Not a whole lot of proof went into place, but it took a long time for divorce to go through. In fact, when we look at the 1950s, an average divorce would take up to 2 years because there were periods of counseling, judges would order spouses back into the home. We could show a Lifetime movie here and some of the results of that. By the 1960s and 70s, we start the influence of no-fault divorce. Now, no-fault divorce starts in California, and you can easily see why it starts there. We have the power of Hollywood coming into place and the power that comes with that money process. They wanted they wanted divorces here in this country instead of going to Mexico for a quickie divorce, though they could afford to do that. As no-fault divorce, that means I don't have to prove my spouse has been unfaithful. I don't have to run you through the mud. I can take those things and say, I'm just tired of you. It's kind of like the throwaway society, but think about it in a different way of 2 years of fighting for divorce in an abusive situation. There are multiple reasons this came into place. Starts in California, jumps to the East Coast. So we see it move through that process, get out to the East Coast, work its way back. Now, divorce, as is marriage, is a state law. And only recently, with the federal government coming into place to say gay and lesbian marriage is legal, has the federal government taken a step to look at marriage, that marriage had been a state right. And so every state, the rules are different, and the society. So divorce rates are higher for those who marry under the age of 20. For those living in poverty, much higher rates of divorce. For those with a high school and some college, higher rates of divorce. One of the things that you need to think as there are many social factors that come into place. People are marrying later. Really interesting as you start thinking about that. So the average time of marriage today is about 24 and 26. For men, marrying later, waiting till they're after college, much more likely to be a stable relationship. People are also choosing not to marry as often. They cohabitate as is acceptable in society. So that changes things, and divorce rates have actually been declining. So pretty significant when you think about that. Now, but divorce is still a problem because of the well-being of children and the concerns that come into place. It will more likely place women and children in poverty. Big issues. Another big social problem is violence and neglect in family. Intimate partner violence in the United States, nearly 25% of surveyed women and 8% of surveyed men report that they were raped or physically assaulted by a current or former intimate partner. And in fact, it was not until about 20 years ago that rape within marriage was illegal in all states. So pretty important as we think of what has gone into place. We see that feminist researchers argue that domestic violence is the rooted in gender. And so this is why the drawback to some of that feminist theory as we look at the things that are going on. And there are significant cultural differences of what's acceptable. And what we have seen is researchers locally focused on white and poor women, and yet we know that intimate partner violence occurs at all economic levels. We just aren't always able to study it at the same level. Child abuse, another major social problem within family. And you can see why you can spend a whole course even just talking about the negatives can be overwhelming as in the time period. Child abuse is 15 times more likely to occur when there's spousal abuse in place, that there's violence within the home. Now that abuse can be either by the perpetrator of the spousal abuse, or it can be a trickle-down effect. And children are 3 times more likely to be abused by their father than their mother. But guess what? At younger ages, where children are abused more, mothers often are in the pattern of abuse as well. So we know that this is not just a gendered issue. Neglect is the failure to provide for children's basic needs. You've got a quick video on child abuse to understand those definitions and what comes into place. Other abuse in the home include elder abuse. And there's institutional elder abuse that occurs in nursing homes where people are not well cared for, or in group homes or board and care homes that don't feed their patient, but more abuse of the elderly occurs within their family setting. And so we see this domestic elder abuse. That's the maltreatment by someone with that special relationship to the elderly. And here it differs from child abuse, which said physical, emotional, educational, and neglect. For elders, we look at the physical, the emotional, the neglect, and exploitation, taking their financial pieces. So you can see how it differs in that process. Teenage young adults will oftentimes be exploiting. I won't say oftentimes, but are found to exploit older adults. Drug and alcohol add to this, and we will look at drugs and alcohol and the power it has in place. So a lot of things when we come in to the issues of family. Your book continues to talk about the problems of time and money, the economics, the teen pregnancy. Remember, teen pregnancy has been dropping, but places, rural areas, it stayed high. Pretty significant as the effect on families and the demands on families. When you have a teen pregnancy, we have higher rates of abuse to children. We have newborn abandonment that comes into place, and these children often lag behind. We also see that grandparents take over the responsibility of those children, and oftentimes they too were teen parents and may only be in their 30s and 40s, which definitely affect their retirement and how they address those issues. We see some significant issues coming into place, as well as we look at the ability for families to care for each other. It is the number one care provider in the world is your family members. And yet we still do have some issues as far as the need today for that dual earner family to exist. How do you provide for that care? So as things have been established like the Family Medical Leave Act under the Clinton administration, what's interesting about this, though people are eligible for it, they do not apply for it and they do not take it for fear of losing their job and because of the lost wages that come into place. The support for the family in this country is limited and important as we consider what the social problem is. So what are you doing for this module? I'm asking you to watch this short video on Kelsey's story. Also, 2 videos on Susan Stills. And her case was the longest sentencing for someone for domestic violence in the state of New York, as she talks about what occurred within the process. I'm asking you to watch a short clip on child abuse. Previously, I showed the film. The clip gives you enough information. And finally, thinking about how to solve this social problem, I want you to think about of violence against women and a wonderful TED Talk by Jackson Cates. With that, then you can move to your discussion board to examine the issues of American families. Is it dying? What are the changes? What do we need to do to strengthen families? And what are some of the ways to solve these social problems? With that, I look forward to seeing your exams next week and what you've been learning as well. Thanks and have a great day.